Hi there, you're back with newsPeeksLIVE. I'm James Topley. Here with me is distinguished Charles Lewis, a pioneer of independent journalism. He established the Centre for Public Integrity, and his most recent book, 935 Lies, is another example of his clear and transparent approach towards public injustices worldwide. I guess my first question to you, Charles, is why does the government lie? What is it, in the broadest sense?
Well, a British fellow in the 1800s, Lord Acton, said, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And power is about controlling information, and whoever has the most wins. And it's that simple. And so secrets that will embarrass the government, they usually want to keep quiet, and things that they're pushing as an agenda are the things they want to put out there, press releases, whatever. And the manipulation of information is fundamental to having and using and controlling power and political promise, I guess you'd say. And powerful interests also have to deal with government, and most politicians in democracies at least rely on money, which comes from those powerful interests. So there's all this influence going on, and there's all this controlling information type things going on. And there's two types of lying: omission, error by omission, not telling people everything they should know, and error by commission, where you flat out lie. Government makes decisions every day, hundreds, maybe thousands of decisions at all levels, and they're involving information at every moment. And so it's inevitable that those who have power will occasionally not mention everything they know, or just shade it slightly this way or that, and then that builds up over time.
Right. And what would you say was the greatest and most shocking to you in terms of actually uncovering something that was just a complete fiction?
Well, I mean, the one that is, I call it the most mortally consequential, killed the most people easily, is the tobacco industry. They knew from the 1930s that their product killed people. And even after the US Surgeon General and British health authorities said it kills you in the 1960s, 30 years later, you had the CEOs swearing under oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, all saying they don't know if there was anything unhealthy about smoking. One of the tobacco CEOs said that he thought eating Twinkies might be more dangerous to your health than smoking. And so they were still lying through their teeth half a century or more. 60, 70 years later, 100 million people died from smoking in the 20th century. There are internal memos from the 60s, 40 million memos now exist in an archive. And these lawyers said, well, we don't really know how to handle this. We can't use facts and truth because, well, frankly, that doesn't help us because, in other words, our product kills. And they said, the best thing we can do is create doubt. Doubt is our product. If they could just make it seem like they're still looking into it and they hope it's healthy and they care about your health, gosh, they sure do. And they have commercials both in first TV, and then they were banned, and then newspapers and magazine ads, then maybe no one will notice that, oh, by the way, millions of people are dying from this product. And that's what they had done for 60 years, and they were convicted of federal racketeering for consciously lying for 60 years in the US in 2006. So that sheer amount of carnage is of unprecedented human proportion, really. There's no war and no company that ever, or industry that ever killed that many people. Now we could discuss whether they knew they were dying and should have taken it. Yes, the public and citizens have some responsibility. I'm not saying they don't, but that's pretty outrageous. To me, everything else pales in comparison, really. I mean, I found lots of lies. I mean, everywhere I looked. So the book took 9 years just to track everything.
But that's a very general lie, isn't it? The corporations try to appeal to people on personal levels, and they have this image of you choosing sort of logos and appealing to people's aesthetic.
Well, they do. I mean, public relations, I have a section in my book that I finished that looks at the history of public relations, and it's really incredibly
sinister.
Well, in the 1890s, political scientists and shrinks, psychiatrists, whatever, they all started to figure out how to control the public mind. There would be a field in World War I. There were thousands of people in the U.S. and Britain and elsewhere who were trying to manipulate the public mind. Woodrow Wilson, the president of the U.S., wanted us to go to war, and they started doing propaganda, and they realized, and there's writings around World War I and in the 20s, that you can influence the public mind because most citizens. There's a famous line by a famous journalist named Walter Lippmann in 1922, Liberty and the News, and he wrote this. He said that most Americans or most people come into a theater and they miss the beginning of the movie, and they might even not even stay for the rest of the movie, but their emotions are struck by something they see, and it's an impressionistic thing, and they similarly could affect impressions, and easily with advertising, of course, which starts up in a big way in the first part of the 20th century, and there's lots of famous stories about how these industries then went from there. We had 100,000 public relations people in the U.S. government payroll during World War II to get people excited about going to war, and of course we had it with the recent Iraq War quite a bit. And so influencing the public, whatever the issue is, whether it's companies or governments, we have been pretty substantially manipulated now for a century or more, and it is a science. I mean, it's something of a science. Those who do it know exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly what buttons to push. It usually involves emotions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that we're so ready to call things like the Nazis and the communist era a propaganda machine, and say you're being lied to, and it's almost a distraction from what we're being told by our Western, supposedly nicer.
It's true. One of the fathers of public relations. Can you imagine? I would never want to be the father of that. But anyway, there are two men who both are called the father. One of them went to work for a German company that was making the gas used in the Holocaust, and they were convicted by the Nuremberg War tribunals. And I went through the personal papers of this guy. He died in 1934, and his son and he had an office in Berlin in the lead up to World War II, and the son didn't think anyone ever would read his letters. And he wrote home to his mother. He's there with dear old dad helping the Nazis, and he said that he was doing Sieg Heil so often that his arm was getting tired, and so when the U.S. government and the public in America found out that this American was helping the Nazis make sure everyone doesn't think they're a threat all through the 30s, which is why he was hired. They put him in front of a congressional hearing with lights, and he basically died within a year of that experience. And they created the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which anyone who lobbies and lies on behalf of a foreign interest has to register in Washington. It all started with public relations for Nazis in the
that's
U.S.
the area that was born out
but
of,
public relations started to people say, that's not always good, is it? Public relations.
Yeah, I think that's great because these are all the problems, but I think I'd like you to define and kind of explain impartial news and why that's so important in counterbalancing the stuff we were just talking about.
Well, whoever's in power, whichever political party or political interest in any country, they have an agenda, they have a specific set of policies, and whatever they say very possibly is not true. And so, and there's also competing interests in government. Usually there's different parties, and so a journalist, having some measured judgment and some distance and some independence is really vital, because it's possible that both sides could be lying through their teeth. That's a real challenge for a journalist. But it's also dishonest to merely parrot back what they all say, that both or one may be completely flatly untrue. I mean, categorically a lie.
Yeah, so it doesn't work to play one off the other then.
Right, and if you keep repeating the lie, that's what the press did in the Iraq War. They were getting statements that turned out to be completely false and erroneous. Millions of words written globally, and it turned out, we find out a year or two later, that everything we were told was simply not true, the whole justification for the war. And so the journalists went with, in the post 9/11 moment, and especially in America,
the mass hysteria.
Yeah, mass hysteria. Everyone kind of weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. public, I can only speak to that, but it's probably somewhat the case here in Britain, I'm guessing. There was such a sense of this is terrible, and everyone was wounded, their psyche, I mean, about what had happened with 9/11, that reason and the thoughtfulness about public policy was not exactly, or measured judgment by the public, let alone journalists. Everyone was kind of in a bad mood and a retaliatory mood, and that's why we went to a war, which is essentially an illegal war. It was not approved by the UN Security Council or the General Assembly of the United Nations. The head of the UN even said it was an illegal war. And it turned out that the justification for the war was actually not true.
Yeah, totally frivolous.
No weapons, yeah. So that's an example of if the journalists had been more detached and were not just parroting back what the White House said in the case of the U.S. or the British government with the Prime Minister, et cetera, there might have been a chance to come to our senses and not commit a few trillion dollars and lots of, as the phrase goes, blood and treasure to a war that was, some think that war helped to create our current problems now. We're now in the third Iraq war in 20 years. What's that about? I mean, there is something unusual about this. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I was wondering, how do we combat these issues of lying in public? And people like Ed Snowden have proven that there is whistleblowing. Whistleblowing does exist, and these problems can be solved through those. But those are very extreme options to have to take in order just to get the bare minimum truth that we should be given as citizens. And the fact that these are actually endangering the individuals who expose these truths means that people, are scared. They probably have a right to be with these kind of people.
Right.
But how do we combat it legitimately?
Well, journalists have got to, I talked about this earlier in this conference, the issue of real-time truth. Journalists have to be on top of these issues and not allow themselves to be bamboozled, constantly provide context and context is really what I'm talking about. Like, what's the historic context? Are we sure we're really doing this? Are we sure we've really checked about our intelligence gathering about this subject? Are we persuaded? They have to be more critical, basically. The media was completely deferential. They practically rolled down like a dog, rolling across the floor. They just didn't do any aggressive journalism. I used to have journalists from around the world visit my office 2 blocks from the White House, at the Center for Public Integrity that I ran and started and ran, and they would say, "What's happened to the media in America? You guys used to have Watergate and Woodward and Bernstein, and now everyone's got laryngitis. Everyone's quiet. No one's talking about anything. No one's asking tough questions." And I said, I think they're just a little bit benumbed by 9/11, and the public is clearly mad. Yeah. People wanted to go do something, want to kill somebody, we just don't know who. And I think that was partly an atmospheric issue. It was partly, but the media has historically, journalists have had problems when in wartime. The Vietnam War in the U.S., they got it wrong. They went with what the administration said. They were critical. They were trying to be critical, but most of the reporting was totally deferential and bowing down to the government. And this is a problem. There's a great book by a famous British journalist who was a friend of mine, Philip Knightley, and he wrote the most important book ever written about lying during war, called The First Casualty. Yeah. And the famous quote by an American senator that war is the first casualty of truth. Yeah. And I think that's right.
Which is very true. And also, I think with the Iraq War and especially things like that, we saw the media engaging alongside the politicians in this cycle of fear and consumption for the public. To do just that.
No, we did. We had in the U.S. we had this red, white, and blue flags, and journalists were wearing lapel pins with flags and
the Patriot Act.
So everything was about an American. We're going to go get those, and there was it was really a peculiar, and actually, the most conservative broadcast outlet in most parts of the world, including the U.S., is Fox News. The most conservative red, white, and blue salute the flag thing in America was NBC, not Fox. It's actually been tracked and measured, so they were all doing this. Yeah. And it's really pretty disturbing. And the other thing, I've studied, actually my group, the Center for Public Integrity, investigated a 110,000 word report with 10 researchers, the way the Pentagon deals with journalists from the Vietnam War all the way up to the first Persian Gulf War. And it's a long, involved story about how they do it. I'll spare you. Yeah. But it is really an interesting phenomenon. They've always managed to control the information. First Persian Gulf War, they put all the reporters in Saudi Arabia or Washington. They wouldn't let anyone on the battlefield. Wow. And then they would give them press releases. Big surprise, they all wrote their press releases, right? Yeah. The British learned in the Falkland Islands before that if you, after the Vietnam War with body bags in living rooms, they realized if you put the reporters on a ship 10 miles away from anything, and then you censor whatever they do and read and approve before it airs, that's a good way to control it. And so by the time we got to the most insidious thing is what happened in Iraq. They thought, okay, you want to be in the middle of the action? We're not going to put you in Saudi Arabia. We'll let you become embedded. That became the phrase. So then you're going to do a local story about this wonderful unit and how brave they are. And you're doing PR again, but you think I'm right there and I'm seeing everything. No, you're seeing what happened in this obscure village. And yes, we all feel sorry for these humans who are forced into a military war. That does not mean you're objectively covering the war. Meanwhile, the reporters at the White House or here in London are parroting back what they've been told. Yeah. And we feel sorry for the soldiers, and that's exactly what happened. It's really
so really lies just get mirrored all around.
It's all I call. I don't know if this is a bad word or not. I call it caca. It's all it's all wallpaper, and it's all things to make us feel more comfortable and make whatever they're saying more palatable to the public. I mean, it's as old as it's more than a century old, and probably goes even back further. But in an information age where things move so fast, it's actually arguably easier. The other thing is the media has become increasingly sophisticated with the new media form, social media. Yep. The Obama administration has more handlers handling the media than any prior president. Every recent president has more than the last president.
And they spend a lot more time on it in their campaigning as well.
Yeah, forget emails. We're talking video. They used to have a radio show on Saturdays. Forget radio. Now we do radio and video. And then they go on all the popular shows like the talk shows and things and yuck it up about issues that have nothing to do with anything real, but they want to seem like regular people and aren't we wonderful? And I mean, it's all very slick. And the Bush administration hired 450 public relations people when he came into office, and they went to work. That's all I can say.
But so since you left mainstream media, you're famous for leaving 60 seconds.
60 minutes.
60 minutes, sorry.
And wish it was 60 seconds. It would have gotten things done a lot faster.
I was wondering, do you think things have become more or less politically motivated since you left? What's the state of it? Has it become worse or
of
better?
The media, you mean?
Yeah, mainstream media.
Well, 60 Minutes, is in the U.S. is the most successful news show, most popular, most watched
on CBS
in the history of in the U.S. of television, and the most aggressive, in-your-face investigative reporting really occurred, I have to say, in the 70s and early 80s, and it got soft after that. 60 Minutes does 110 segments a year. I would guess that no more than 5 are original investigative reporting. That is to say, they did it themselves. They didn't jump on top of someone's book and do a book thing, or they actually. I'm talking about they do an
original independent journalism.
Yeah, and so I think all of the media, all the networks, ABC, NBC, CBS in America, they lost half of all of their reporters and producers from the 80s to today, cutbacks. CBS, Edward R. Murrow's network, who was here during the Battle of Britain, this is London. And guess what? CBS had 28 bureaus in the world. By the 2005, 2006, they had 5. Wow. So it's really tragic. So then you get canned material from other places in the world and you talk over it. Yep. And you're not even there. And that's what's happened to journalism. It's sound bites are shorter. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, people would talk for 40 seconds. Yeah. Then it was 20 seconds. Then it was 10 seconds. Now it's down to around 6 seconds. I used to do hundreds of interviews a year when I ran the center. I did 5 book tours. And I had a correspondent for NBC once say, "Could you not say that word? It has 3 syllables." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So I should say a different word." Because we only have like 6 seconds. You got to...
Such a dumbing down, though. Such a reductive attitude.
What do you say that's thoughtful in 6 seconds? It's almost impossible. And the segments used to be 2 or 3 minutes, then they were a minute 30, then they're a minute. Pretty soon they were 45 seconds. Pretty soon the anchor would just talk to the other reporter in the studio. It's cheaper than producing, of course. So we have some problems.
Yeah.
in the media.
I think we've got a Twitter question coming up.
Sure.
From one of our viewers. Should we be blaming journalists or systems which stop journalists from having the resources to do the real investigations?
Great question. That sounds like a journalist asked that. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm a journalist. We do need journalists have been under siege. To be fair, first of all, it's very dangerous in the world to be a journalist. 1,000 or more journalists were killed in the last 10 years. 92% of journalists killed, they never find who killed them. And most of them are not killed in wars. They're killed trying to investigate corruption. Yeah. 148 out of 158 countries on planet Earth have criminal libel. So not only will they sue you and take away all your financial assets, your bank account, your house if you have a house, they'll put you in prison for the rest of your life as a criminal. So you'll lose everything. So that's outside. That's not obviously. That's other parts of the world. Britain has very difficult libel laws, probably some of the worst in the world for journalists. I mean, you get threatened on the way to doing the story. A powerful interest will call the editors and they'll stop the story before it even is being fully reported. That's internal censorship, and it happens. So the journalists, the actual working stiff, wonderful reporters are like my friends. They are now, they've had a rough time economically. The newsrooms have shrunk, and they're asked to do more stories in shorter time and all those things. So I do think the systems, the reason public, nonprofit journalism that I have sort of helped to kind of lead the way or helped lead the way, I've been in the space for 25 to 30 years. When I started the Center for Public Integrity, it was the second one in the U.S. and the world. Now there are 100 in the U.S. alone, and you have some here in Britain, and they're around the world as well, dozens of them now. And so there is a way to do it and take longer and do more thorough reporting, but it's a challenge also. You got to find the money, and it's got to be on a regular basis, not episodically when you have the money, and you've got to have an editor and a publisher that cares about it. By 2000 in the U.S., 70% of journalists no longer trusted the owners. They thought the owners only wanted to make money, which actually is true, I think. I'm one of those 70%. And so I think journalists they're the salt of the earth. They are doing, I'm not that religious, but I would call it God's work. I mean, they're doing something really important for the world. They're putting themselves at risk. I was sued by Russian billionaire oligarchs, my Center for Public Integrity, when we did a story about Dick Cheney and Halliburton's activities in Russia. And I hate when that happens. But it took 5 years and it got dismissed. But journalists put themselves out there. And so I've been one for almost 40 years, 35 or 40 years. And to me, there's honestly no higher calling. And it is true that the business systems around journalism are all messed up, and they have been for decades. And they have squeezed journalists from inside the industry, from inside the business of journalism. And journalists need to be supported more. And so there's a lot of things that can be done. What's great about this conference is you've got all public interest-minded folks, some of whom are quote-unquote traditional journalists. Traditional meaning it could be nonprofit or commercial, but I mean they try to be somewhat independent in their judgment and the processes. But you also, of course, have others here who are everything from whistleblowers to hacktivists, and others all intermeshed with each other because everyone wants the truth and everyone wants to see that happen. And I think that's really inspiring, I have to say.
It's great. So you're doing a great job. I think we've got one more.
Oh, sure.
What examples of some good organisations in the world that young people should be getting their news from? I have to say, the Centre for Public Integrity is
Well, I may be not objective there, but it also, part of the center is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is 185, I call them Jedi Knights. These are premier investigative reporters, the top in their countries. 185 journalists in 65 countries on 6 continents.
What's this called? Sorry, can you repeat it for
It's, you mean the URL? It's the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. It's part of the center. Okay. Publicintegrity.org gets you everything. Cool. That's US and world. But that's, so that I would say that, obviously I'm not objective there. But in the US, our other 2 big investigative reporting organizations are the Center for Investigative Reporting, which Lowell Bergman co-founded, and ProPublica, which is a newer group, started in 2008. The only 2 nonprofits, well, 2 of those early ones, Center for Public Integrity just won a Pulitzer Prize. ProPublica has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. But those are groups, I mean, and National Public Radio in the U.S. does a good job. They doubled their audience within 10 years of the 9/11. Yeah. And that's nonprofit. I mean, it has some government support, but they do high quality work. So there are a lot of groups, I mean, and there are a lot of, I know there's a lot of exciting new media models that particularly younger folks like, that are sort of seen as promising, but they also have uneven content. You know, I think it's fair to say, I'm not trying to be critical, but anyway, I think that we're in this place here where there's a new evolution going on, where we're getting a lot of new folks entering the space. We're getting people into big data. That means there's all kinds of numbers and data, things coming from inside the government or from other places. So the opportunities to do great journalism are actually exciting right now. Yeah. There are great entities. Here in Britain, you have the Center for Investigative Journalism, and you've got the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I think I've got that right. The 2 nonprofits that I know of, and the Bureau has actually tracked all of the killings by drones on planet Earth, including 400 or 500 civilians, maybe higher now. I forget the numbers, but that takes a lot of time to track every death of a civilian around the world. I mean, my God. I mean, so you know, I think we're seeing some exciting things here, and with citizens ever since the British subway bombing, where there were thousands of photos from cell phones because the journalists, the media companies, the media itself was kept above ground. They wouldn't let them down into the subways. But the folks on the subway cars took their shots, and that helped create significant information. The woman food blogger in Thailand who was the first to tell the world that, oh, by the way, there's a coup d'etat here. They just toppled the government. There are things happening where citizens are doing things, and it's really kind of exciting to watch. And so I think all this is a very fluid, really exciting place to be. And I just hope citizens and you know, younger generations rise up and demand facts and truth, you know. Stop the blarney, give us the straight stuff, you know. And I think we need the old cliche from a famous American movie, Network. We all need to be mad as hell and not taken anymore. Yeah, it's great. And I think it's essential, actually. Information relates to power, and if we have the right information, we can all know what the hell is going on. Yeah. And I think it's essential. So I think it's no higher calling. I'm not objective, though.
Great. I was wondering, does anyone here who wants to ask Charles a question? Is there any member of the audience? So I've got one last question. Okay. For my final question, I was wondering, what lies are the public currently being told? You know, we talked about a lot of lies that were sort of 10 years ago. You know, what are we being told now? What's the misinformation today?
Well, I mean, one is drones. When Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, I don't know if he mentioned the word drones, it was 1 or 2 times out of thousands of statements. No one knew he was going to quintuple the use of drone killing. That is, and the worst part is they would not acknowledge that they were using drones for like the first term, the entire first 4 years. But if they killed an Al-Qaeda person, the White House would put out a statement that another Al-Qaeda person died, but they wouldn't discuss how he died. Drones. And so it's a little too cute by half. They don't really want to tell you, but they want to brag about the killing. So I think he's been disingenuous about that. Obama did mislead the public a little bit on healthcare. He got the Liar of the Year award by PolitiFact, as folks that track lies. But you know, there's so many so many lies.
Yeah.
Which ones do we focus on most deeply? I mean, most
that
of
have a human consequence. You know what I mean? The ones that affect people.
Well, the ones that have a human those are normally health-related ads or problems where the people are putting veneer over reality about health. In my book 935 Lies, I actually look at all the corporate lying, that not just tobacco, many other examples. And those
alcohol is still widely advertised even in this country.
Well, it is. That's really interesting. I mean, alcohol, we all know in both countries, both the U.S. and Britain, we know that alcohol abuse is a hugely significant problem, and alcohol abuse meaning like addiction and drunk driving. All those things are an immense public health problem, and they're not regulated very closely, as are other products not regulated. And some of the laws we had before are now being done away with entirely. In the case of actually marijuana use in the U.S., several states now. So that's kind of interesting. So anyway, life. One thing, the only constant in life is change. And so whenever we think we understand anything or know anything, we find out shortly that it A, could change, and B, it might not be true, what we heard. You have to just hold on to your wallet and make sure you're not walking under a falling piano. And just do the best you can.
Great. I think we're going to finish up with one more Twitter question,
sure.
And then we'll let you free. Has the drive for 24-hour news weakened journalists' ability to do in-depth reporting?
It's a great question. Short answer, yes. I mean, there's daily reporting where you break anytime something big happens at 1 o'clock, 1 a.m. You're there and you can go live. The problem is you've got to have staffing for 3 shifts of 24 hours, and you're going to have a skeletal shift at 1 a.m. And you're not going to be in the field. You're going to be in the studio. We have a lot more television reporting. Is no longer in the field, that they buy the video from someplace and they don't leave the building. I mean, and that used to not be the way it was done. And so 24-hour news, I think it's kind of exciting to have I have no problems with the idea of 24-hour news.
It's just a filler and the kind of
the idea they've got. It is.
It's the constant kind of stimulation. Right.
It's kind of, like we talk about the Malaysian airline crashing in CNN, I think did it for 3 or 4 months. They started making up models of what it looks like for a plane to crash, and they had models of how would it be like to go in the ocean at
when they actually knew nothing.
They knew absolutely nothing. It was completely BSing about what really was happening. It was disgusting. I mean, so that part I don't like. This wallpaper, we got to fill time, and let's just get people upset about this. And it's all about emotions, ratings and emotions and driving. And that part is artificial, and I actually hate it. But I also appreciate it if something big in the news happens, I want to know it, and I don't always want to wait till the evening news that night. So I'm not against 24-hour news, but I do think the question is, has it weakened the ability to do in-depth journalism? It has, because you have a budget, and you either cover everything from the studio whenever it's happening, or you send people into the field. But how do you do both well? Well, it's hard. And I'd say, CNN in the U.S. has had investigative units come and go. They just fired a bunch of people recently, and so it's much easier to do 24-hour news than it is to have investigative reporting. Plus, they're in 100 countries for a reason. They were given the permission by the governments to be in those 100 countries. So does that mean they're going to poke the president of China in the eye in their reporting?
Yeah.
Maybe not. So I do think there are problems with 24-hour news, but we do need to make more room for investigative reporting. We need more in-depth information, not less. And journalists, the people, the hardy souls who do investigative reporting, that work takes time, it costs money. It also brings liable lawsuits sometimes if you investigate companies. Why do so many reporters investigate the government? Because you don't get sued.
Well, great. Thank you so much for coming in today to talk to us about it. This is Charles Lewis. I'm James Topley. That was newsPeeksLIVE. We'll be back shortly.